Welcome to the game of the day. This is International Master John Watson, and we're going to look at a game played today from the last round of the Norway Chess tournament. And before we get to that, let me review the results for you. On the top board, Vishy Anand and Veselin Topalov were competing for first place, and were the only ones that could reach first place. But Anand needed to win to overtake Topalov, and in somewhat of a disappointment, the two played a very uneventful game, which led to a very early draw by repetition. I will say, however, that these openings are funny. I think that Anand, if the opening had gone in another direction, Anand certainly would have tried to play for a win. It just petered out. He was a little bit fooled probably in the opening. And actually, Topalov probably would have tried to play for a win just because if he'd gotten some sort of advantage, just because he's that kind of player. So nevertheless, that was a very short game. Caruana-Giri was a very hard-fought game and a lot of fun, but there was a dynamic balance that never seemed to quite shift, and the game was eventually drawn. It was actually quite even throughout. Fun game to play over. The probably second best game of the round, besides the one I'm going to show you, is Aronian and Nakamura, where Nakamura's excellent play continued. Another extremely complicated game, and at some point he just took over the initiative and won rather quickly once he grabbed the initiative. Excellent play, as I say. An Aronian slump has been continuing. He's not doing really well recently, at least for someone of his stature and genius. And Nakamura, by doing that, grabbed second place, share of second place with Anand by winning the game. Veselin and Grischuk was also interesting and very unbalanced, but suddenly everything came off into a very interesting ending, but one that was a drawn ending, and it was well played by both and indeed drawn. So that brings us to the game before you. Well, let me also mention the standings at the end. So Veselin Topalov won the tournament outright, which is very refreshing. Topalov, of course, was the best player in the world for some years, and then hasn't been a high publicity player recently, hasn't played as much as he used to, and it's a great win for him. And Vishy Anand and Hikaru Nakamura, who have both been playing fantastically recently, finished tied for second and third. Anish Giri got clear fourth with 5.5. I could mention the scores. Topalov was 6.5. Anand and Nakamura 6, Giri 5.5, and then we slip all the way down to a tie for fifth and sixth with Fabiano Caruana and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave at 4 points, and another tie between Magnus Carlsen, of all people, and Alexander Grischuk with 3.5 points. An under 50% result for Magnus Carlsen, just unheard of. That's for 7th and 8th place, and 9th and 10th were shared at 3 points by Levan Aronian and Jon Ludvig. So let's move to a game here, which is indeed by Jon Ludvig and also versus Magnus Carlsen, who is black. And Jon Ludvig Hammer. I don't know what's wrong with me. So I called him by his wrong name, but Jon Ludvig Hammer had a very deceptive tournament, actually. I watched all of his games, and it was very exciting because he played maybe even the most interesting chess of all. His result wasn't very good. He tied for last, which would have been expected because he was playing so far ahead of himself and above himself. But the way he achieved that result was extraordinary. He very coolly and against all of this pressure held his own, or even outplayed most of his opponents, some in the opening and some in the middle game. But he seemed to succumb to nerves at the very end, sometimes time pressure, and he lost some very tragic games by either just an elementary oversight or a blunder, and he also failed to convert some excellent positions. So in this game, we're going to see him at his best. So this was a nice game and a good finish for a tournament where he deserved a better score than he got. There's Magnus now. Now, that's a very strange, odd move. He's just sort of basically trying to get out of book, as he does sometimes. And that's a little odd, too, but it makes a lot of sense. He's getting the bishop out before he moves his pawn in front of the pawn chain. And it's an interesting timing, because if he plays a move like this, then he might be pinned at an